So,
Yeah,
welcome from Gscene to Peter Kyle. How nice to see you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much. And it's really nice to see you. Just doing this sort of virtual thing. I have it on a little tripod here, so actually it means you can gesticulate. So even when I'm talking to my dad, it does feel a bit more normal because people are actually sitting in front of you and you can look directly at people and so forth. So those little things make quite a difference, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. So are you getting out at all? Because I know Parliament's reconvening today. So are you going to be making any physical appearances there or virtual appearances?
I will definitely be making appearances. I'm laughing to myself because I was due to be speaking there today because I was promoted to the front bench by
congratulations. I was going to come
Thank you. I wasn't fishing for a compliment, I promise, but I only mentioned it because the oral questions in the House of Commons for Justice were supposed to be today. It was supposed to be at 2:30 today.
Right.
And it's all a bit sort of nerdy sort of Parliament stuff, but the oral session was put in by the standing orders of the House of Commons as agreed, and the business agreed before the recess. So it can't be overturned. So it means that had to be the first order of business today. So the motion, which is going to be to amend the standing orders so that we can meet virtually, is straight after the justice questions. So I got the call from the whips a couple of weeks ago saying that you will have to be present in the House of Commons. Now, I spoke in the House of Commons on the very last day twice, and there was a lot of social distancing going on, and there was a lot of effort going in to that. So I was kind of fine with that. And personally, I was really, really excited just for being able to move, because I've taken the lockdown very seriously. So the idea of just being able to move away from my home and to be up there, just to sort of be in a different environment for a bit, I was really excited for it. And then I got the call a couple of nights ago from the whip saying that we've come to an agreement with the government and we've cancelled the entire session. So there won't be any oral questions for Justice this time, and they're going to try and find a way of getting it onto the order paper a bit later, but virtually.
Okay.
And I have to say, I was a bit crestfallen because I was really excited to get stuck in on my new brief, but I was also really just excited to move more than 100 yards from where I live.
So if you appear virtually, you're going to put your suit and tie on, or are there orders about what you can wear or not wear if you're appearing on screen?
Once again, you've hit on a point. I don't have a suit in my flat. I don't wear a suit down here in Brighton. Yeah, I keep it all in London. So for me, I didn't own a tie until I was in my 30s, and I think I had one for sort of weddings and stuff. But I didn't really own a tie, a proper one, till I was in my 30s, and that was when I first got a job as a policy advisor, and I bought it in Victoria Station on the way up to starting on my first day. So I've never really been comfortable in suits. If you think, my first job really was at the body shop, where it wasn't really a thing. Then I was an aid worker for almost 10 years. Then I was a student. Then I set my own business up with my sort of business partner. So it was just never a thing that formality in work was never really a big thing for me. So what I do, and I'm never really comfortable in a suit particularly. So what I tend to do is walk into work in Parliament, put the suit on then. But when I finish my business for the day, the sort of public side of the job, then I go back to my office and I get changed and I'm, dressed like this, just because the hours are very, very long. And for me, being comfortable is a really important thing. And then the other thing is that when I first got selected as a candidate way back in 2013, I did some door knocking on the day after, and I wore a suit to do it because I thought, you should wear a suit. Now in Hove, if you're knocking on doors wearing a suit, people think you're so weird. And very, very few people who work around here will formally wear a suit every day. The vast majority of people who work here are working at the universities, or they're working in their own businesses, or they're self-employed and working from home. So, I just, in the end, just stopped keeping suits in the constituency. And when it comes up to things like Remembrance Day, I bring a suit back down from London. So anyway, I come rushing down from London for the lockdown. I start the lockdown, and now they're talking about virtual Parliament. And I only read the email about the virtual Parliament about 10 minutes before we started this conversation. So, because we've only been told very, very late precisely how it'll work. And in it does say that you have to respect the norms of the chamber, including dress. So I'm thinking, well, what am I going to do? I'll find a way around it. I've got a jacket. And Speaker Burko did make a declaration that you don't have to wear a tie in the chamber. But having said everything I've just said about dress and how I don't like wearing suits, I would never dream of not wearing a full suit and tie in the chamber. I do think that's about respecting the job, and it's about respecting the public, and it's about respecting the people who put you into the job. It's just a visible token of respect to me. So I would never dream of doing that. But I think I'm going to have to find a way of getting through it, because there is no way on God's earth I am not going to be getting stuck in when things, with everything that's unfolding now, whatever it takes.
and with the virtual parliament, so you won't kind of have full debates or whatever. Is there a way of voting?
We haven't figured voting out yet. So to start with, we're going to do the very, very basics. So there will be what they call oral questions. So there'll be questions to a cabinet minister every day. That's how the Commons starts every morning. On a Monday, it starts at 2:30. It's 11:30 on a Tuesday, 11:30 on a Wednesday, and then 9:30 on a Thursday. The first hour is always questions to a different departmental secretary of state. And for me, that's my favourite part of the Commons, because it's a way you can just go in and you can just do a question on a relevant issue. And it's a good way of really just laying a marker down and just getting stuck in on a key issue. Then it's usually followed by the business of the House. On a sort of Monday, Tuesday, it's usually legislation. On a Wednesday, it's usually a backbench debate. On a Thursday, it depends how busy everything is. So what they're doing at the moment is they're sticking to the bare bones of the Commons. So there will be the hour, I believe, there'll be the hour of questions to a Secretary of State first thing. Then it will be followed by any statements that need to be made. And that is when a government minister will say, I need to say this, and get it on the record in the House of Commons. And then MPs have the opportunity to ask a question after every statement. Secondly, urgent questions. That's when a backbench MP or a frontbencher applies to the Speaker in the morning and says, there is a really urgent matter, very pressing. The government aren't making a statement about it. We think the government needs to be summoned to the House of Commons to force to answer questions. And it'll just be those things for the time being. We're not doing legislation at the moment. And I think this is just so we can stabilise and get used to it. The Speaker can get used to it. We can get used to it as MPs, because legislation is difficult, and it's not just in the main debate in the House of Commons. It then goes off into committee. And I don't think the Commons has the resource yet to virtually manage the House of Commons chamber. Then you've got the select committees, and I sit on one of those, and I'll be coming off the Bayes Select Committee soon.
I was going to ask you about that, actually.
Yeah, and I love the committee, so I'm staying on as long as I possibly can until somebody else can be elected. But we are now allowed to meet once a week, but we as a committee haven't met yet publicly. We're going to do it for the first time this week on Thursday. So all of this means the sort of televisual technical side of staffing the House of Commons is really difficult. Then having all these different committees, and people don't realise that the vast bulk of work in Parliament actually isn't in the main chamber, it's in all these different committees. So once you pass a legislation in the House of Commons chamber, it then goes off into committee. And these are 7 hours a day, 3 days a week sometimes. So, to get all of this done virtually is very, very difficult. I suspect legislation will be delayed for a while. And I expect the capacity of the House of Commons technically to get the staffing in there will start to build over time, and we'll start to be able to do more and more and more.
Yeah, it's an interesting time. So I was reading the article by Philip Pullman. I don't know if you saw it, where he said, well, this is the perfect opportunity to actually just revisit the whole way that Parliament works. Build a new building that's that works as a Parliament, that has enough room for everyone to sit in and to be heard and to be called and to be seen, and up to date voting, electronic voting, and so on. That just it's maybe the opportunity to do a bit of outside.
Well, I think this is really interesting, and this is a debate we need to have. When you first become an MP, you arrive in the Commons, and some of the way you do things is completely impenetrable. It's really difficult to figure out where you need to be, how you speak. when you're going to be called. All these bobbing just looks so odd, you know, standing up and sitting down in order to attract the attention of the speaker, and some of the other ways of doing things. And so you start to think, this is ridiculous. I don't like this. It should be done differently. Now, what I now say to MPs, because in the 5 years I've been an MP, there's been 3 general elections. So to the MPs that were elected after me in the 2017-2019 elections, I say to them, before you stand up and shout about this, write it down, and then 6 months later, go back and then reread what you're unhappy with. Because it's really incredible how some things you start to think, oh, actually, I see why that happens now. You know, we've had a parliamentary culture that's lasted for 600 years. And some of the traditions in the House of Commons go back hundreds of years. And whereas sometimes it doesn't make sense to start with, sometimes it emerges and it really does make sense. And it is very, very effective. Mm-hmm. And other times there are things that do just need to change. You know, voting is one of them. But there are also, you know, there's a flip side to everything. I mean, that's why we need to have a debate about it. So with voting, it is the only time when every MP has to be in one place at one time. And it is an amazing chance for MPs to meet other MPs. Now, there are times when, let me give you an example. I had a constituent who was, you might remember the case, it was somebody, a young woman went to Thailand and she died in Thailand, and we didn't know whether it was suspicious circumstances or not. The family immediately went over to Thailand. They contacted me and said that they were having real difficulty with the Foreign Office. I immediately contacted the Foreign Office, but I didn't get to speak to the Foreign Secretary. Shouldn't have to, but I wasn't getting the response that I needed. The family are in dire straits and they are stranded aboard. They're grieving, they're panicking, they're in real pain, and there's something that they need from the Foreign Office that they're not getting. Now, there was a vote, and I thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to stand outside the exit to the vote, and I'm going to wait for the Foreign Secretary to come through. So, and that's precisely what I did. And when he came through, I grabbed him and I just said, Dominic, I need 10 seconds of your time. Now, it wasn't a very pleasant exchange, I've got to say, but I got the exchange done. And I was able to go back to the family and say, I have spoken directly to the Foreign Secretary. I have put your point directly to the Foreign Secretary. If we were voting electronically, that exchange wouldn't have been possible. So all I'm saying is, that's not a reason not to reform, but actually the way you do things in the House of Commons sometimes isn't really logical. It doesn't make sense from the outside. It's not intuitive. It's really not intuitive. Nothing in the Commons is intuitive. But when you learn it, you realize it's a system that actually has its merits as well, if you learn it. And we live in an age where viewers, people, the public viewing from the outside, feel that they have a right for it to be instantly intuitive. All I'm saying is, understand before you demand change. And also, our politics does involve you to learn our politics as well as us shaping our politics. So it's instantly accessible without you having to make any effort. And people who make effort to understand politics, people who make effort to understand our politics get a lot out of the engagement that they have. And the size of the chamber is the same. There are 477 seats, 650 MPs, but it's only ever busy in very, very key moments, usually Prime Minister's question time once a week, and then when there's very big moments of debate. Churchill decided to keep it small because when the bulk of the business is being carried out, if it had 650 seats, it would be an echoey chamber that would look even more empty, and it would be a very, very difficult speaking environment. It would lack all intimacy. So they chose to get a chamber that was right for the majority of the work, rather than the extremes of the work when it was either too small because there's few people in it, or everyone's cramming in and everyone has a right to a seat. So, you know, it's difficult and odd, but you know, I've got friends in I have friends in Norway. Every blooming week they tuned into Prime Minister's Question Time, and they're not a political family. When I went to visit them, this is a while ago now, I couldn't believe it, and I said, why? And they said, our politics is so boring. We love seeing politicians fight it out. And they watched our PMQs rather than their own parliament. They never ever watched their own parliament. So let's just have the debate. It's all I'm saying. I'm not saying it doesn't need reform. You know, Berko did a lot of reforming, and I was very, very supportive of it. But let's not throw the baby out of the bathwater.
Okay, understood. I get all that. So presumably you've had to reorganise your constituency support team, and presumably your parliamentary support office as well. And I imagine your post bag, for want of a better word, is busier than ever, with people trying to work their way through how they're particularly affected, because obviously things that are announced then can't apply to everybody. So then it's about the fine tuning and making sure that everybody gets supported. So what kind of things are coming through with your constituency stuff?
Well, we locked down, we reorganized the team and the way we did things very, very early on, way before the lockdown happened, a couple of weeks beforehand. As soon as we saw where this was heading, I stopped staff coming into the office in London because it was very difficult to socially distance in London. And don't forget, we had the very first outbreak in Brighton and Hove. The so-called super spreader was one of my constituents. This was back in the very, very beginning, in the beginning of February. So we had the experience.
When there was testing and contact tracing and...
Exactly.
Right.
And bear in mind how stunningly effective that very first strategy was. There were 7 residents locally who caught coronavirus. Not one of them passed it on to a single person in Britain. We contained it, we traced it, we got, it was fantastically effective. But we can talk about what unfolded after that. That's where my criticisms lie. Yeah. But so I learned a huge amount. And in that time, I was having daily briefings from the Chief Medical Officer's office. I was having daily briefings from health ministers and all these public health officials. And I learned a huge amount at the very beginning. So as soon as I saw where this was going and where the contagion had become more widespread in Britain, it had already taken hold of Lombardy in Italy. I stopped staff coming into Parliament, and they started working from home, or started working from Hove, where we could all work 2 meters apart from each other. So we adapted very, very early. Then when the lockdown happened, we were all very, very well prepared for it. But it was very difficult because there was a real avalanche of correspondence. And we have a very, very effective system. I've got an incredible team who I just, every day I, thank the heavens for, because we get on very, very well and we are unbelievably productive. So when the avalanche of correspondence happened, because people were very worried about public health, people were very worried about, children schooling, people with disabilities, government was very quick to give broad advice, very slow to give very specific advice. So if people had long-term health conditions, if they were caring for people who had long-term health conditions, they didn't quite know what their specific advice was. And at the same time, of course, it was having a massive knock-on effect for businesses. That awful period where they told people not to visit pubs and clubs and restaurants, but didn't shut them. The ambiguity that caused. We were trying to deal with people who were customers, loyal customers, and very sensitive, hardworking managers and owners of restaurants, pubs, and clubs who didn't know what to do. They have a loyalty to their customers. Sometimes the customers have a loyalty to the establishment as well. And that's what the government really misunderstood and underestimated. So that period, it all started to ramp up. And then, of course, when the lockdown happened, the supporting people with the economic impact, and that's been consistently the biggest challenge that we've had. Very, very difficult, because sometimes we don't have the information ourselves because government hasn't decided themselves. And then also my team are dispersed in their own homes now. Some of them had to self-isolate. I think 2 members of staff almost certainly caught coronavirus and had fairly mild, but thankfully they were able to recover quite quickly. But I certainly wouldn't be expecting them to do work at the time. And I couldn't do what I normally do, which is at peak times call in a team of volunteers who will help me, because virtually it's very difficult to have access to the technology, to the computers, to the parliamentary systems, which I all have in the office. So all these things are challenges that we've kind of overcome. And the interesting thing that I've noticed since the lockdown which is always present but not normal for this volume, is you get the bulk of people who will call up and contact you by email. And we have very, very good systems for that. But there's been this thing where, because we live in the world we live in, we have Twitter, we got Facebook, we got, you know, Instagram, and people find a way around the sort of the mainstream. And I get bombarded with messages via direct messages, which isn't normally the case. So normally I manage the direct messages with myself because there's so few of them. But now sometimes there'll be 200 or 300 in the space of 48 hours. And only I have access to that. And then sometimes you'll get a message from someone that will say, look, I'm in real difficulties about this. When I finally do start to catch up, you see an hour later, why haven't you replied? And then 2 hours later, you're my MP, you know, you still not replied to my message. And then an hour after that, I'm never voting for you again. And this is a message that's come via Instagram and gone into the pile of things you just don't see with all the other stuff. And then there's Twitter messages, and then there's Facebook messages. And then somehow it's my personal Facebook page that you get all these sort of messages from that you don't see. And then suddenly you stumble across, and there's hundreds of them. And it's heartbreaking for me because I want every single person that contacts me to get a response instantly. A response, you know, hopefully from me directly, but usually from somebody, so that they know that I'm here and we are here to listen, respond, to give them a voice, to hear their unique circumstances and make sure their unique circumstances are heard at the top. That's what my job is. So that's the weird thing. And sometimes you can feel a little bit like it's a dam that's water's starting to come out. It's sort of like, you know, it overwhelms you a bit. But, you know, those are the things that I'm learning. Yeah. And productivity is difficult during at a time like this, because I'm normally in London with a team, in Hove with a team. I'm always around people. So much of the work just happens during quick conversation. And when you are in that environment, everybody's updated instantly because you're all in the same space. So very difficult when it's WhatsApp and everyone comes in independently via WhatsApp. You spend your whole day, you know, replying to messages, and it's very, very. I find that really difficult.
I've spoken to quite a few people. My brother, to Bessie, who was James Ledwood's partner, who runs the team, and they're working harder than they ever had, or even if they're at home. Just the sheer logistics of managing a team of people that you're not physically present with, and that's kind of counterintuitive because you think it's a much more efficient way, but especially when it's busy times like this, actually typing things and waiting for responses is actually a very inefficient way.
It's hub and spoke. I mean, you go back to normally the teams are far more organic and you're all in the same space, so the communication is much more organic. Now it's very hub and spoke again because everyone is just sort of going through a central bit. And you know, I looked at my screen time on my phone the other day, and I was spending like 7.5 or 8 hours, you know, with my phone active in a day. And yet you end the day and you don't feel productive. I don't, because you know, your job as an MP your job as an MP in a crisis. You know, I think that your community rightly expect you to be two things: visible in your community and getting stuck in Parliament. And when those two things are taken away from you as an MP, it's very difficult to end the day thinking, you know, have people seen me? Do they feel they have access to me? Have I been able to, you know, stand up in Parliament and make sure that their concerns are unignorable? And that for me is really quite soul destroying, knowing that I can't end the day having done those sorts of things. So it's about trying to sort of reinvent the job for the circumstances that we're in. And it's not always easy. It's not, and it's very rarely does it feel satisfying that I've actually accomplished what I set out to in the day.
And just very briefly, you know, coming out of this, we all hope we'll all be better people and that we'll, you know, have different views and be more compassionate and kind. And I mean, you can keep your fingers crossed. I think we may even be more polarized in some ways. They seem to be different. But moving on from that, potentially there are some good things that might come out of it in terms of public perception and public behaviour. But obviously what is going to come out of it is a huge economic hit, and a huge economic hit for Brighton and Hove, which, you know, is dependent on visitors and events and so on. you know, Pride has been cancelled, the festival, the Fringe, and there are a number of things. I imagine the bike ride may not happen, and marathons and so on. You know, in the greater scheme of things, compared to the rest of the country, do you think it's going to take us longer to get back out of that, or?
It's going to take us a long time, because we've got to have an economic recovery, but we also have to have a public health recovery. And the evidence or the expert opinion says that it's going to be a bit of a sort of a dance coming out of this. It's not going to be okay, everyone, we can get back to normal now. You know, because it goes from like over a 3-week period. You know, after you change our public behaviour, you'll only know how effective it is and what the consequences are about 3 weeks later. So, you know, we're going to start to unlock different bits of the economy. We're going to start to unlock some of the freedoms that we have again as citizens and individuals. And then a few weeks later, we'll know if there's consequences. And if there is consequences, then we'll have to adjust again. So it's not going to be until we can have a vaccine, or we can have some kind of, you know, system of treating coronavirus, then we're not going to be able to just suddenly go back to, you know, as we were and behaving in the same kind of way. And that's going to be very difficult for a lot of people. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, you're completely right. We have to breathe life back into our local economy here. Just yesterday, I spoke to a councillor locally, and we were talking about, you know, well, what I have to do. You know, let's start thinking about how I can act in a way that's going to try and benefit our economy going forward. And I said to him in these terms, you know, we need to start thinking of me as a salesperson again. You know, if there are, not again, but, you know, in general, if there are conferences abroad that we could have here, I will happily act as a salesperson. I will call whoever it takes. I will have, you know, bring them into Parliament and sell our community. You know, let's see what global conferences we can bring into our community. Make sure that it's not just Brighton, but it's Hove as well. That we as a city can run the doors when it's and start really, you know, getting people in who haven't come here before. So we can't just rely on people to trickle back to old patterns. You know, we're really going to have to really throw ourselves into making sure that our economy has, you know, starts to thrive again, but also, you know, really just starts to, you know, get up to speed again and beyond. And I'm very happy to throw myself into that into ways that I wouldn't before. And if that means me sitting in my flat in the office in Hove or up in Parliament, working the phones to get our city onto people's agenda, not just domestically, but globally, you know, I'm up for it. The third thing is this very important point, which is, you know, do we go back to business as normal? No, we have to aim for business as better. And that is something we've got to be really clear on. I don't want to go back to the way our economy worked pre-coronavirus. That shouldn't be the height of our ambition. But we also have this thing now that's happening, which has brought our entire economy to a standstill, which is the perfect opportunity to start rethinking it as we restart it. It was very clear that there were long-term trends whereby that have been impacting our economy, whereby earned income wasn't through wages is no longer the biggest driver of wealth creation. So there is unearned income, such as property and other types of unearned income that were generating wealth for a lot of people. But if you were born into a family that doesn't have assets, then, you know, you were really going to struggle in life. And you still are. I mean, it hasn't changed already. But if you are talent rich but asset poor, you're going to really struggle in life. That's not fair. That's a long-term trend that we have to really think about. Not just taxing income, but really thinking about how we tax wealth and how we actually distribute that wealth. That's something we really got to think about. And then sort of there are short-term things as well, such as austerity, which I would class as a short-term thing. It's 10 years old now. We cannot have austerity type 2, Mark 2, as a result of paying back the debt that we're going to have as a nation after this. We simply can't. The foolishness of austerity was to think that we could pay back decades worth of debt in 5 years, or halve the debt, you know, reduce the deficit in a 5-year period. It punished all the wrong people. it stymied social mobility. It really trampled on people's ability to succeed in the modern economy, and the wrong people were trampled on, i.e. the access to the economy that we would want to give to people who come from disadvantaged and poorer backgrounds was absolutely held back. So we cannot go into those things again. We've got to reinvent the economy, so we're taxing wealth where it exists, not where it was 50 years ago. And we need to make sure that when we recover from this, we think of it much more about paying back a mortgage rather than paying back an overdraft. And I think that's the difference between austerity and the way that we recovered from World War II. Paying back our debt for World War II didn't happen until, didn't complete until 10 years ago. So, that's the kind of thing. I'm not saying we need to leave it, 50, 60 years, but we do need to make sure we do it in a way that prioritizes growth. We start to think a bit more longer term about it, but we use the opportunity it provides to rethink how we tax, how we spend, how we invest in individuals plus communities across the entire countries, because clearly some communities, not just in parts of the country that were highlighted during the Brexit debate, but also here in the southeast, coastal towns and so forth. We've got to rethink how we share opportunity, access to big economies and metropolitan areas like ours, transport, health, education. All these things have got to be rethought. What a great opportunity this will be, providing we all have the space to have that conversation, and that rests on government. Hopefully Boris Johnson's experience that he's had through this crisis, firstly being out of his depth in preparing for it, because clearly he wasn't preparing our country for what happened in the way that he should have been, and secondly ending up in intensive care himself. He had a sight, he had an experience of our NHS at its very, very best, and very demonstrably he was moved by it, because that statement, that video he put out when he came out was clearly authentic, and he was clearly really moved by what he experienced and the humanity, caring and professionalism that he saw in the people who work in the NHS. So hopefully those two experiences will allow us to go to him and say, we need now to reward and make good on the experiences that you have had as Prime Minister in the last couple of months. Let's keep our fingers crossed.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Peter. That's been half an hour's chat, which is brilliant.
Sorry, was there loads of things you didn't get in because I prattled on too much?
No. That's one of the joys about these things, is that we don't have to fit into a schedule or anything. So it is what it is. And as I said to you before, I usually just top and tail it and put some titles on and put it out there. So that's very good. And I know you're busy, so I'm very grateful that you've taken the time to come and talk to us. And maybe
I'm very grateful for your time.
We'll do it again.
And I really, really hope that the people who are watching this are in good spirits, even though sometimes they won't be in good health, and that they are able to connect with lots of people virtually, and at least wave at people when they're out having a walk and so forth. But I really, really hope that people are doing as well as can be expected in such difficult times.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Peter. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye. Cheers.